Hello and welcome. We're coming to you live from Viet Nam at the GEF Assembly. This is a GEF Live series, a series of Facebook Live discussions on the Connect for Climate Facebook page. My name is Max Edkins from the Connect for Climate program at the World Bank. And our next discussion is going to be with a special guest, Guido Schmidt-Traub. Thank you so very much for joining us. So Guido is the Executive Director for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is a network working around the world. I know it best probably through the New York run, through University of Columbia. But maybe if you could just get us rolling and explain us a little bit about the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, who you are, where you're active, and what do you stand for?
Right, well thank you. It's great to be here with you today. Great to be at the GEF. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN, was set up in 2012 at the request of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the time, operating under his mandate, now of course under Antonio Guterres' mandate. And the basic motivation is that we, the world, faces very complex challenges, many of them on the environmental side, but also inequality, the future of jobs, many other challenges, and of course the deep challenges of extreme poverty which remain unresolved. And we need to apply more knowledge to these issues. There's plenty of politics, but we don't apply enough knowledge to solving these issues. And universities and knowledge institutions in countries are not sufficiently engaged in this. That's what we're trying to change. So we're building a global network of universities. We've got about 800 members now that focus on policy questions, concrete solutions initiatives, and then education and training for sustainable development.
So it's really around bridging that gap between the knowledge creators, the academic environment, and the policy makers, the government leaders,
right,
and facilitating that knowledge transfer to really enhance the agenda around sustainable development, achieving the sustainable development goals,
right,
addressing climate change, and also what we're discussing here, how to take action on the global commons to ensure that our global commons remain our life support systems.
That's exactly right. So it is really, in the jargon, it's the science policy interface. So we're not a research network. We're really trying to take knowledge and apply it. And what I'm really struck by is that when you go to countries, particularly in this region, particularly in Asia, and you speak to ministers of the environment, but also ministers of finance are very aware of the environmental challenges. They're very aware. They see the effects of climate change. But then when you ask them, sir, what is your strategy? What do you do? Very often the question is, look, we know it's a big issue, but we don't really know what to do. And so it is one big binding constraint. It's not the only one. There is politics, there's political will, there's financing. But in many countries, we also have the lack of knowledge of what to do as being a binding constraint. That's what we want to resolve.
And a lot of the knowledge around driving the solutions, around driving transformative change in this space is being discussed here at the GEF Assembly. So what are these kind of ideas coming forward? What are the drivers of transformative change? What is this new circular economy? How do you work with the new climate economy? If you could just unpack that a little bit and present the solutions on the table.
No, it's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of the solutions that are being discussed here. Innovative ways of managing agriculture, and so that, for example, need to be scaled up. But there is one piece that we work on in particular that I think is not sufficiently present in the conversations. And that is, what is a country's strategy towards sustainable land use and food systems? What is a country's strategy towards a decarbonized energy system? And just bear with me for a little bit is, in 2013, just 2 years before the climate conference, when everyone was talking about climate, and particularly about the energy system, we got together the leading energy and climate research institutions from the G20 countries. And we said to them, ladies and gentlemen, what do you have in terms of analyses for your countries that you have done or that you're aware of that somebody else has done that you think are good enough to at least have a conversation, a chat with your government about what an energy system consistent with 2 degrees Celsius might look like and how to get there. And out of the 17 countries in the room, 14 had nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Wow.
Including the United States of America, including Canada, including Australia, including Japan. And of course, India, China, Brazil also didn't have this. And so I think it's quite intuitive that if political leaders don't know what 2 degrees Celsius might mean for the energy system. Is it going to wreck the economy? Is it going to destroy jobs? Yeah. Is it even technically feasible? If they don't have answers to that basic question, we're not going to get real commitments. Yeah. And so what we then did is we launched a project with many partners called the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project to develop these pathways, but in country. Not to have somebody in Europe or in the US telling Brazil what to do, which doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't work.
Absolutely.
But to have Brazilians develop this. And that actually helped propel the movement forwards. And one of the things that we're discussing here at the GEF 7 and at the GEF Assembly is there's of course a big focus on food and land use restoration. It's a big impact program that the GEF 7 is launching. It's a very impressive, bold ambition. And if you look at which countries have a pathway towards sustainable land and food systems, the answer is it's an empty set. Yeah. There isn't a single country in the world, including the most developed, including the most advanced economies, that has a sense of how to move towards it. And so it's quite intuitive, if we don't fill that gap, we're not going to get there. So that's not to say we don't need to talk about bottom-up innovation. I love the solutions that are being discussed here, but we also need the framework, and that's what we're working on.
Absolutely, and the framework can really build up on those bottom-up innovations that are already taking place on the ground.
Well, absolutely. Those two talk to each other. You need to know what works on the ground to put into your framework. Yeah. You need to have the framework to see what is it that we focus on. And this has to be, and this is not about coming up with a perfect plan. That's impossible over 50 years. But to have a framework for really seriously discussing quantitatively what needs to be done in a way that's also geospatially explicit, so you can look at it at a map, because it's area-based, of course. That's the conversation that really needs to happen everywhere. It's a conversation that has started in Brazil. If you're looking at best practice in the world, you're looking at advanced emerging economies, so-called developing countries still. Yeah. Brazil is the world leader on this, undisputably. But it's not happening sufficiently, even in Brazil, and it's certainly not happening in India, it's not happening in Indonesia, it's not happening enough. When I say it's not happening enough. There's a lot happening, and that's the gap that we're trying to fill.
Absolutely. So maybe just looking ahead, you've already mentioned that there are quite good frameworks and strategies in place for, say, the energy system, increasingly also for sustainable cities and sustainable transport. But the big questions still remain around landscapes and landscape use, and how to create the framework under which then you can bring all stakeholders on board, how you can bring in the private sector, and ensure that a holistic and exciting approach is developed to achieve a low-carbon sustainable future. So looking ahead, what are the key ingredients to help accelerate the deployment of these frameworks, of these directives, of these pathways for each country, and then more broadly for the globe at large?
Right. So just going through the steps, step number one is you need data. Mm-hmm. The good news is there's a lot of data that's becoming available, lots of satellite data, so that's no longer the biggest issue. The second issue then is you need actually a framework or model where you can put all these different things together. You can have your biodiversity layer. Biodiversity is the one that always falls out. It's the truth. Once you talk agriculture, food, biodiversity tends to fall out, but it needs to be part of the conversation. Biodiversity, agricultural productivity, water, the hydrological cycle, infrastructure, cities. And those are tools which have only now become available. So 10 years ago, they didn't exist. And Brazil has got this in place, very sophisticated. Indonesia is building this out. China's got bits and pieces, they don't have anything integrated. India doesn't have such a tool. To my knowledge, Vietnam doesn't have it. And the European countries also don't have it across. The European countries have got a tool, but it doesn't include, for example, food demand. That's the second big step, is building those tools. And some of it is heavy-duty modeling work, very data-intensive. That's the capacity that needs to be built. Yeah. The third step then is to say, well, then you project into the future and say, what would be a sustainable future? You come up with a pathway. Yeah. It's got to be long-term, because these are long-term drivers. And then you take those pathways and convene the stakeholders around them. Yeah. You talk to the different branches of government. It becomes a framework where you can have the Minister of Agriculture, of Water, of Environmental Resource, of Finance come together of international trade, come together and say, you know, does this represent a future that we think is feasible? And at least have an integrated conversation. You need to have the same conversation with civil society and with businesses, critically. And then they're going to come back and say, well, you haven't thought about this, you haven't thought about that, so you improve it. Then they might say, well, this seems completely impossible, we've got to rethink it. Okay, well then you see which other screws can you tighten to get your greenhouse gas emissions target. And you build a process whereby people put in more knowledge, more wisdom, more experience, but then also develop a buy-in into this. That's what we need. We've done some of that on the energy side in some places. This hasn't yet been done in the land use side, and that's why I think the impact program that the GEF has developed is an important mechanism to do this.
Absolutely, and that's where the excitement comes in. It's where, you know, you get the buy-in, where everybody comes on board and realizes, okay, that is a sustainable future that we're aiming for, and that is how we're going to sculpt and redirect our businesses to ensure that we get there, or how we as civil society will hold the government accountable to that. So maybe just in closing, your message for a younger audience. We're on Facebook Live, so if you could just share with them how you think they can get involved, how they can be suppliers of the data, how they can be involved in designing and researching the future that we all need and that we want, as well as becoming the actors and implementing the solutions and getting us to that sustainable development trajectory.
Right. Well, I mean, the first thing, obviously, this is a massively important issue. And I think people don't understand yet, widely appreciate enough how unsustainable land use and food systems are currently. They really are broken, and if we continue on this trend, we're going to face major environmental, but also social and economic disasters. So this is, I can't think of a more important agenda for the young generation. The second message is a lot of work that needs to be done. If you want to do a career in this, I really urge you to look at some of the practical challenges that need to be addressed. There are financing questions, there's deep scientific questions, modeling questions, and in some ways the good news is that we haven't figured that out, because that's something that's a problem that we can solve fairly quickly, and there's a lot of thinking that needs to happen. Third is we need very good advocacy around this. And let's not get stuck in the little solutions. Obviously we need them as well. We need to build the bottom-up momentum. But let's also focus on the big picture. So we should all advocate, we should all ask our governments, what's the plan? How are we going to get to sustainable land use? Because we know that a plan doesn't guarantee success. Plans may not get implemented. But we do know for sure that the absence of a plan guarantees failure. And that's where we currently are in every country. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you live in Vietnam, if you live in the United States, if you live in Brazil, if you live in Europe. The challenge is, there's no developed or developing countries here. Everyone is in the same boat, and everyone faces the same issues. So that's what I would say. And so we need the youth to really advocate this. Let's put the solutions on the table and then have public dialogues around them. Because we need in every single country to figure out how we're going to organize ourselves to meet these goals.
Perfect. So you've heard it from Guido. Let's get that plan in place. Let's figure out how we're going to drive our countries to a more sustainable future, and let's all work together to getting there. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
We've been live on the Connect for Climate page here at the GEF Assembly in Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the great work. It was great to be with you.